Hi, I'm Simon Roderick from Search, and I'm delighted to be joined by John Jenkins, the CEO of Haydock Finance, the asset finance specialist. John, we've spoken on the phone and we've exchanged emails, but we haven't actually seen each other now for well, probably over a year. How are you keeping?
Keeping all right, actually. Thank you, Simon. It's been a strange old 12 months, I think, for all of us, but it's been okay. In some respects, there's been some positives, sort of a bit more time with family, a bit more time seeing my family, but then all the kind of the challenges that come with lockdowns and managing a business in a lockdown and everything that goes with it, and not getting away on holiday quite as often as I'm used to, and now worrying that we're not going to get a skiing holiday in for the first time in about 40 years. So yes, a few things to consider, but first world problems, I guess, given everything that's going on.
I think lockdown 3 perhaps feels a bit different for people in the sense the weather's not quite so good. That novelty value's worn off, and we've been at home a long time now. I'm not sure if that's your experience.
I would agree. It was actually, I'm smiling because it was really nice on Sunday. We had snow here over the weekend, and I think everybody went out on Sunday for a walk, and it was evident that for a lot of people that was a big release. There were lots of smiling faces, lots of kids sort of playing snowballs and building snowmen, and family groups doing the same. So you could see that was a bit of a lift in what's felt like a pretty dreary 3 weeks or so as we kind of push on through this. It was much easier back in sort of May and June when the sun was shining and you could get outside a bit more often.
So true, so true. John, there's lots I want to discuss with you today because obviously Haydock are at the forefront of the business lending community. So you can imagine I've got lots of questions, but would you kindly just give everyone a brief overview of your career and tell them a little bit about Haydock's business?
Sure. So I'm an accountant by training. Kind of found my way into commercial finance slightly by accident about 30 years ago and have stayed there ever since. Long stints with Lloyd's Banking Group as it is now, then a long stint with GE Capital, always on the commercial finance side and generally on specialist commercial, things like asset finance, invoice discounting, asset-based lending, stock finance, things like that. And then the last 2 years have been at Haydock, leading their sort of growth journey, really, as we seek to sort of move that business forwards. And Haydock's an asset finance business. It's been around for 40 years. Just starting our 41st year, we had a nice big party set up last May to celebrate the 40th, which, but 41's the new 40, right? So we're going to celebrate the 41st. So focus on SMEs and mostly hard assets. So we do finance for businesses acquiring trucks, plant, machinery, buses, things like that. Some construction equipment, some things of that nature. So we're sort of involved in freight, we're involved in plant hire, construction businesses, manufacturing businesses, quite a lot of coach businesses and bus businesses as well that sort of come into it. So we've seen a really varied reaction to the environment that we've been in, depending on which sector our customers are in. What we don't do is very much in the kind of retail or services space. So we've kind of been slightly insulated from that.
Yeah.
But it's 80 odd people based mostly up in Blackburn with regional officers, so regional managers around the country, looking after our brokers who give us most of our business. And yeah, about 3,500, 4,000 customers, about 400 million of balance sheet.
I can't wait to ask you about the things that you've seen and the trends. If I look at my own business, the two practices that I think have been particularly interesting, one is sales and marketing because of the digital transformation that's taking place across companies, and that's really accelerated over the last 12 months. And secondly, we call it specialist finance or specialist lending because whilst asset finance is a huge part of what that practice does, we do work with some other people in perhaps bridging loans and those other areas. But what I can't move away from is that you've got a good visibility into other businesses, but you too run a business. And 2020 was a year unlike any other. Have you had to change how you operate to navigate COVID?
It's been really, really interesting. And I'm secretly admitting to having quite enjoyed the last 12 months. Because I think if you like a challenge and you like to have to respond and react as I do, then there's not many years that have brought this much sort of challenge with it, and some opportunity too. I think the first thing we had to get over was moving quite a traditional business that had been used to coming into the office every morning, and it's quite an operational process, asset finance, so it feels a bit like a factory, and people were used to coming in to the factory and working through the day and then going home. And to switch that on its head and say, well, you're all going to have to work from home now, was a significant challenge in those first few weeks, partly culturally because my team weren't used to it, my senior team weren't used to it, partly practically as we had to equip everybody to work on a system that wasn't really designed to work from home, and make sure that our IT had the right level of stability, the right level of security, that they could access what they needed to, that they had the tools they needed to operate. And all credit to my IT team and the broader team. That was done really, really quickly and effectively, such that we could all sort of manage the practical aspects of doing the job as efficiently as we could from home. I think that the softer side of working from home gets a little bit forgotten. So we did a fair amount of work around engagement and well-being, as many others did, so the quizzes and the cake bakes and all that sort of good stuff to keep people interested and excited. And I think support people and ease people into trying to replace a bit of the sociability dynamic you get when you're in the office, which certainly once the novelty of being at home and the practical challenge had been overcome, that was the big challenge for a lot of people. I'm just not seeing anyone, I'm not talking to anyone. And with that came a need to create a lot more structure around how we communicate, whether that's how we communicated with our teams, whether it's how I communicate with my senior team, how we communicate with our brokers and our introducers, because you're used to doing this stuff informally, and sometimes you don't even know you're doing it. You wander around the office and you have a chat. Well, you can't do that, but you still kind of feel the need to talk. So how do you create some structure in it? I'd catch up most days I was in the office with all of my direct reports, my directors, my senior managers. Well, how do I do that? Do I do it every day, or do I do it once a week? So how do you create that structure? And I think that's been some positive learns, as well as some practical reactions in terms of that comfort now around, no, we can have a video call. That's fine. We can do that. We don't need to be in the same office having the same conversation all the time. We can do it differently. And then I think the third bit was around process. We had got used to working in a certain way because we could. And because we could chat across the office and say, what are you doing with that deal now then? And what's happened to that one over there then? And so that kind of disguised what, when you stripped it back, were a lot of inefficiencies. So how do you reduce the number of times you need to do that? Because it's now really hard to do that. So we spent some good time looking at our processes, testing them, refining them, getting rid of a lot of stuff that we did because it was easy to do, but in kind of the second analysis, well, why are we doing it at all? So that's been quite an effective change, I think, that the year has brought. But yeah, so lots of really interesting challenges, but ultimately, I think some really positive lessons too.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because nobody would ever wish COVID on anyone, any workforce, any individual who catches it. But I do think it's given companies the opportunity to catch breath and perhaps revisit some of their processes. But it's fascinating to hear you talk about culture, because a lot of the CEOs and leaders that I talk to, that their one challenge is, how do you maintain culture and look after staff in a remote environment? But it sounds like you guys have worked quite hard and had quite a lot of engagement by the sounds of it.
We've tried to work very hard on creating some regularity of communication. So for the first probably 12 weeks, 14 weeks, I did a weekly town hall. Everybody dial in. Don't know what we're going to talk about every week, but we'll think of something. We supported that with some sort of more localized stuff like quizzes. We got involved with a consultancy that works on well-being, and they did a kind of an hour and 20-minute session once every 2 or 3 weeks around resilience, around importance of diet and exercise, around flexibility and adaptability, which was, again, it was good stuff anyway, but it was also a really nice excuse to talk to the team and say, why don't you dial into this and let's see what's going on. And we did a couple of socials with some cocktail parties and things like that, which which was good. No, because the tough bit, I'll say, though, has been inducting new people into that culture. We've hired probably a dozen people in the course of the last 7 or 8 months, and inducting them into that culture, training them in the business, getting them used to being part of a business was really hard until we could go into the office, if only briefly. Actually, I'm smiling that we had a little dial-in yesterday. It was somebody's 50th birthday, and there was a photograph of one of the teams that was put up to sort of celebrate this guy's 50th, and he was. And one of the little comments came saying, "That's the first time I've seen so and so below the waist," which I thought was, which I'd not really thought of. And you go, actually, no, you've never met them in person. You've only ever seen this bit of them on a screen.
That's right.
So I think that's been the biggest challenge. How do you create that cultural engagement for new people? And it's going to be a lot easier as we're able to get back into the office, if only occasionally, to kind of start to ingrain that again.
Really good point, sir. And in terms of the businesses that you're supporting in the segments that you work in, how are UK firms faring, and what are credit conditions like in your experience?
So I think it's been very mixed. You know, if we look back to last year, the first lockdown period, that first 3 months, everybody kind of wondering which way was up, lots of help, lots of support, lots of rescheduling. And then as that tracked through into the summer, it became obvious that certain sectors were already back to work and were all kind of okay. So manufacturing, construction, certain sectors were very much not okay. And, you know, we have the obvious ones like retail and hospitality that we hear about, but also things like coach tour operators, outdoor events operators, fairground operators, all of whom we deal with in part. You know, they were very much not okay because they rely on that 3 months burn in the summer to really generate probably 3/4 of their revenue for the whole year. So different sort of help there. And I think it's those businesses that are still finding it most difficult to readjust to what's still a very fast-moving environment for them. You know, today we have more announcements on foreign tourists requiring potential quarantining in hotels. This is not the environment where, if you're a coach tour operator, you're rubbing your hands with glee, going, "Great, the tourists are coming back for Easter then." So I think there are certain sectors, Simon, that are going to struggle much more and much more deeply for this. But you know, I say all of that. I'm always amazed at how resilient our SME base is, how adaptable they are, and for every sort of challenge there is an opportunity. And we're already seeing businesses take advantage of those opportunities, investing into recovery, investing to take advantage of sort of changing environment, changing conditions. And COVID actually throws up some positives. If you're a bus operator, then you need more buses because you can't put as many people on your buses. So suddenly you see some opportunities there. And I think the credit environment, which you also asked, is starting to settle out. You know, I talk to our brokers who say that really until now there's been quite constrained appetite from many of the traditional lenders into this space, which has created some opportunity for businesses like mine that are perhaps a bit more adaptable, a bit more agile. But it seems to be settling, and certainly the government schemes have helped. They've helped reassure the lenders, and they've helped to support the borrowers on the sort of C bills and the B bill side. So I think those have all helped and will continue to help.
And you're involved in the C-bill side of things, I think, John, aren't you? From
We are, yeah. We were accredited under the old EFG scheme, and consequently sort of rolled into this scheme, and it's been very, very helpful. I think it's been as helpful for the businesses as it has been for the lenders. You know, we've very much stuck to what we've always done, been very consistent through this in our approach. But if we can do a deal under the C-bill scheme, then it helps the borrower because the government pays their first 12 months of interest. It gives us a little bit of reassurance if we're stretching to help, or perhaps we're terming out for slightly longer than we would wish to originally. So it kind of helps all around.
And is there still demand for C-bills at the moment? Has that slowed down slightly as we've gone through the cycle?
So I think it's slow. I think the peak came as we rolled through Q4, as businesses set themselves up for the coming year and kind of rebased themselves a little bit. But there's still demand out there. We've still seen plenty coming through now with the extension through into this quarter. I think the lockdown announcement for who knows how long during Q1 has pushed another thought process through businesses that perhaps hadn't taken out a C-bills loan or a B-bills loan, who felt they didn't need to, maybe didn't feel the need to take on a bit more debt, and have now realised that actually maybe I've got no choice here. So
Yeah.
we're seeing a bit of a catch through, I would say, but it's from our perspective anyway, it looks like a lower level of demand than we saw in Q4.
And looking forwards to the next sort of 3 to 5 years, what do you feel the kind of UK recovery prospects are? And are there some industries that are going to bounce back quickly, and are there some that are permanently damaged in your view?
It's interesting. Had we not spent 2020 talking about the C word, we'd have spent 2020 talking about the B word. And I think that now is going to have a greater impact probably as we go through the next 5 years than COVID will. I think for certain industries, the short-term impact from COVID has been devastating. So hospitality, leisure, tourism. But in those sort of spaces, I think demand returns as quickly as it can. And maybe there's even a bounce back as people who've been starved of the pub start to go to the pub a bit more often, or they've been desperate to use restaurants and get out and use them. So I think the challenge is that there will be some gaps on, in the high street, there will be some gaps in provision. And so those that are still around and have managed to survive through probably are looking quite positively. As soon as this is released, we're good to go. I think the longer term impact ones, kind of the Brexit ones, will be more interesting to watch. So there is going to be some change, some long-term adjustment as we think about manufacturing, as we think about freight, as we think about agri-businesses. We're already seeing a little bit of short-term friction on the UK border with goods coming in and going out, whether that's our freight and haulage customers complaining that their revenues are down because they've got trucks caught in Holland, whether it's businesses that are trying to acquire assets saying, well, it's great, I know it should have arrived last week, but it's still stuck on the docks. So we're seeing a little bit of that, and that I'm sure will pass. But then the longer term impacts as to, those more global manufacturing environments like motor will perhaps respond differently. And then I think there's a really, really interesting subset where this has maybe accelerated a thematic change that was going on anyway. High street retail being the most obvious example. We've all discovered that we don't really need to go and buy clothes on the high street. We can do it pretty effectively online, and that thematic was happening anyway. I think this has just accelerated it. And I'm not sure how some of that recovers. We've seen the Boohoo Debenhams thing this week. That's another name gone from the high street that's not coming back, and I don't know what replaces it. So that one's fascinating. Air travel, I think some of the environmental thematics and pressures around cost of travel and the improvements in technology like video conferencing were already starting to pressurize the airline business, especially when it came to business travel. I don't know how that recovers. I don't know how many times people are going to fly to New York when they can now effectively do a Zoom call or a Teams call. And the third one is kind of what happens to the business centre in the city. So what happens to the centre of London, the centre of Manchester? Are we all going to flood back to full offices again? And if we do, how long is it going to take? So what does that do for the commercial property sector and even the public transport sector? I think those are perhaps longer impacted spaces that we're going to have to watch carefully. But as always, it's much more interesting speculating about the future than worrying about the past. So.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's some of these changes are fascinating. I mean, the Debenhams deal that went through, I think, yesterday, that's fascinating because you've got an online firm that are taking over, Goliath in the high street, and you perhaps would have thought 10 years ago it'd be the other way around.
Yeah.
And I suspect we're going to see more deals like that. There's talk of ASOS, I think, looking at at other companies, and so that's fascinating. I think you're very right. Even if we do go back to cities, and I think there's a desire for people to get together and see each other, it's not going to be in the same way. I think we're talking about hybrid working. I think you're absolutely right. I can't see why people have an initial or prospect meeting by flying to New York, and perhaps they could have an initial Zoom chat, and then maybe you hop on the plane when things get a bit more serious. And I think you're right; those things are going to have a fairly profound change on how we live.
Yeah, I agree on the hybrid model. I know that a lot of my team want to come back into the office, and they'd be there tomorrow if the guidelines allowed, because they miss the social interaction, they miss the learning opportunities, they just miss that dynamic of not being in the house. But equally, if I talk to them, not very many want to come back 9 to 5 every day. I think the acknowledgement that a bit of flexibility, well, no, I'm looking forward to coming back, but probably not 5 days a week. And I think if you're a commuter going up into central London when all you did was sit on the phone or sit on a screen, you're probably thinking much the same. Well, why am I doing that 5 days out of 5? I'll go in to interact. I'll go in for a meeting with people. I'll go in to see people. But I think it's going to change that dynamic quite a lot.
Yeah, I think so. Well, John, that's been really fascinating. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today. I hope that people that are watching this have enjoyed it as much as I have. And I do look forward to seeing you, well, maybe in the summer if we're lucky, or whenever, but at some point in this year. It'd be fantastic. And thanks for your time again, John.
Pleasure, Simon. Look forward to seeing you.
Take care.